Imagine you are about to board the most luxurious and famous ocean liner in the world, a true floating palace, a symbol of speed, elegance, and above all, safety. Now imagine that on the morning of your departure, an advertisement is printed in the newspaper, right next to the sailing schedule, placed there by a foreign embassy, and it explicitly warns you that you are sailing into a war zone, and that your ship, and any other ship flying the flag of its enemy, is a potential target. Do you still get on board? In the spring of 1915, for the nearly 2,000 passengers and crew of the RMS Lusitania, this was not a hypothetical question. Erik Larson's masterpiece of historical suspense, Dead Wake, is the thrilling, heartbreaking, and deeply philosophical story of that ship's final, fateful voyage. It is a story of two captains on an unavoidable collision course. It is a story of a world descending into the madness of the First World War. And it is a chilling investigation into how 1,000 small, seemingly insignificant details, a shortage of coal, a patch of fog, a bureaucratic blunder, a single fateful turn of the wheel, can conspire to create a single world-changing catastrophe. This is a story about the terrifying fragility of the world we think is safe. To understand the tragedy of the Lusitania, you must first understand the ship itself. In 1915, the Lusitania was not just a ship, it was a legend. It was one of the largest, fastest, and most glamorous ocean liners in the world. It was a four-stacker, a symbol of industrial power and opulence. A ticket on the Lusitania was a ticket into a world of elegance and luxury. Its interiors were a marvel of Edwardian design with grand dining rooms, ornate lounges, and even the new modern marvel of elevators. It was, in the public imagination, a floating palace, a safe and civilized haven in an increasingly uncivilized world. The man in command of this floating palace was Captain William Thomas Turner. Turner was not the typical, charming social captain that the Cunard Line preferred. He was a gruff, quiet, and deeply experienced seaman who preferred the company of his sextant to the company of his wealthy passengers. He was a master of the sea, a man who had spent his entire life on the water. And he, like his employers and his passengers, believed that the Lusitania's greatest defense was its incredible speed. It was widely believed that the ship was simply too fast for any German U-boat to catch. This belief, this comforting and ultimately false sense of security, was the psychological bubble that surrounded the entire voyage. Larson populates this floating palace with a rich and memorable cast of characters, bringing the historical record to life. There is Thea, a young girl traveling with her siblings, excited for the adventure. There is Charles Laureat, a rare book dealer from Boston, carrying a priceless edition of Charles Dickens in his luggage. There is the brilliant and eccentric architect Theodate Pope, one of the first licensed female architects in America. By telling us their stories, Larson makes the ship and its inhabitants feel real, vibrant, and heartbreakingly human. They are not just historical statistics, they are people, full of hopes and dreams, sailing into a danger they cannot or will not fully comprehend. At the very same time that the Lusitania is preparing for its voyage in New York, Larson takes us to another completely different world, a world that is dark, claustrophobic, and brutally efficient. This is the world of the German Unterseeboot, or U-boat specifically, the U-20. If the Lusitania was a floating palace, the U-20 was a cramped and primitive metal tube. Life aboard a World War I submarine was a miserable and terrifying existence. The air was thick with the smell of diesel fuel and unwashed bodies. The space was so cramped that the crew had to sleep on top of the torpedoes, and there was the constant gnawing fear of being crushed by the immense pressure of the deep, or being sunk by an enemy warship. The man in command of this steel coffin was Kapitänleutnant Walter Schwieger. Schwieger was, by all accounts, a skilled and respected U-boat commander. He was young, boyish, and in his own diaries, he comes across as a sensitive and sometimes even poetic man. But in the context of the war, he was a deadly and effective hunter. Larson takes us deep inside the German strategy of unrestricted submarine warfare. Germany, blockaded by the powerful British Navy, had declared the waters around Great Britain a war zone. Their strategy was to use their fleet of U-boats to starve the island nation into submission by sinking any and all merchant and passenger ships, regardless of their nationality. It was a brutal, and in the eyes of the rest of the world, a barbaric strategy. But from the German perspective, it was a necessary act of war. Schwieger and his crew were not monsters, they were professional seamen carrying out the orders of their government. But they were also operating in a strange, detached, and morally numb reality. They would look through a periscope, See not a ship full of human beings but a target, a tonnage, a shape on the horizon. And with a single command, they could unleash a torpedo and send hundreds of people to their deaths, and then sail away, never having to see the faces of their victims. This detached, technological nature of U-boat warfare is one of the book's most chilling and modern themes. The fog of information in Room 40. As these two vessels, the Pallas and the Hunter, begin their journeys, Larson introduces a third crucial player in this drama. A group of men who are not on the sea at all but in a quiet, smoke-filled office deep inside the British Admiralty in London. This is the home of the top-secret British intelligence unit known as Room 40. Room 40 was one of the great triumphs of the First World War. It was the home of a brilliant and eccentric group of codebreakers, linguists, classicists, and puzzle masters, who had accomplished something incredible. They had cracked the German naval codes. This meant that, on any given day, the British Admiralty had an almost godlike view of the war at sea. They could intercept and read the secret coded messages being sent between the German U-boats and their command. They often knew the location, the intentions, and even the name of the captain of every U-boat that was operating in the Atlantic. This creates the central, unbearable suspense of dead wake. The British authorities were not in the dark. They had the information. They knew that the U-20 was operating in the very shipping lanes that the Lusitania was scheduled to sail through. And yet, for a variety of complex and often infuriating reasons, they failed to act effectively on that information. Larson paints a devastating portrait of bureaucratic incompetence and institutional arrogance. The Admiralty was a deeply secretive organization, and they were so protective of their code-breaking secret that they were often unwilling to share specific warnings with merchant ships for fear that it might tip off the Germans that their codes had been broken. There was also a cynical and possibly malevolent theory that some in the British government, including Winston Churchill, saw the potential sinking of a passenger ship with Americans on board as a golden opportunity. Such a tragedy, they knew, might be the one thing that could finally horrify the neutral United States enough to bring them into the war. The story of Room 40 is a profound philosophical lesson in the difference between information and wisdom. The men in Room 40 had all the information in the world, but they were trapped in a fog of war, of bureaucracy, and of their own political calculations. And so they watched, like silent gods, as the Lusitania sailed steadily, day by day, closer to the known location of the Hunter that was waiting for it. A collision course of small details. The final days of the Lusitania's voyage are a masterclass in narrative tension. Larson shows how a series of small, seemingly insignificant and entirely unrelated events all conspired to bring the massive ocean liner and the tiny U-boat to the exact same spot in the ocean at the exact same time. It is a terrifying story of fate, of chance, and of human error. First, there was a shortage of coal. To conserve fuel, the Cunard Line had made the decision to close one of the Lusitania's 4 boiler rooms. This meant that the ship, whose greatest defense was its speed, was not able to travel at its maximum velocity. It was traveling slower than it should have been. Second, there was the issue of a naval escort. The British Admiralty, citing a lack of available ships, made the fateful decision to recall the destroyer that was supposed to escort the Lusitania through the most dangerous part of the war zone. The ship was ordered to proceed alone. Third, there was a patch of fog. On the final morning of its voyage, as it approached the coast of Ireland, the Lusitania was enveloped in a thick fog. Captain Turner, being a cautious seaman, slowed his ship down to a crawl, but when the fog suddenly and unexpectedly lifted, he found himself with a clear view of the Irish coastline. But he was unsure of his exact position. To get a proper navigational fix, he made a fateful decision. He turned the massive 787-foot-long ship so that it was traveling parallel to the coast, making it a perfect, easy broadside target for any U-boat that might be in the area. And at that very moment, Captain Lieutenant Schwieger, aboard the U-20, was having a terrible day. He was low on fuel, he had only 1 torpedo left, and he was about to give up his patrol and head for home. He was looking through his periscope one last time, and then, out of the haze, a miracle appeared. A massive 4-stacker liner moving slowly and turning so that it was presenting its perfect vulnerable side to him. He couldn't believe his luck. He didn't have to chase it. It had been delivered to him. 18 minutes in the Atlantic. At 2:10 p.m. on May 7, 1915, Walter Schwieger gave the order to fire. A single torpedo sped through the water, The trail it left is the dead wake of the book's title, a sign that by the time you see it, your fate is already sealed. The torpedo struck the Lusitania on its starboard side, and then, a moment later, a second, much larger explosion erupted from deep within the ship's hull. This second explosion, which has been the subject of historical debate for a century, is what doomed the Lusitania. It caused the ship to list so severely and so quickly that it was impossible to launch most of the lifeboats. Larson gives us a visceral, heartbreaking, and minute-by-minute account of the ship's final 18 minutes. It is a chaotic and terrifying scene of heroism, of cowardice, of sheer dumb luck. He tells the stories of the people we have come to know. The rare book dealer, Charles Laureate, who calmly puts on his life jacket and helps others before stepping off into the water. The architect, Theodate Pope, who was pulled under by the sinking ship and survives for hours in the freezing water. And the hundreds of others who were not so lucky. In just 18 minutes the floating palace was gone. Nearly 1,200 people, including 128 Americans, lost their lives. From his U-boat a safe distance away, Schwieger watched the entire thing through his periscope, noting in his war diary, with a chillingly detached tone, the great confusion on the decks, and then he sailed away. The final message of Dead Wake is a profound philosophical lesson in how history actually happens. The sinking of the Lusitania was not the result of a single grand evil plan. It was the result of a chaotic and unpredictable confluence of 1,000 small things, of bureaucratic arrogance, of human error, of technological limitations, of bad weather, and of pure, terrible luck. It's a powerful and humbling cautionary tale about the illusion of safety, the importance of heeding warnings, and the terrifying speed with which our modern civilized world can descend into chaos. It is a deep inquiry into the hidden forces that shape our history. If you believe that we must study these catastrophic moments to understand the fragility of our own world, then you're in the right place. Welcome to Geeky Philosopher. Subscribe, and let's continue the journey.